No worries.
Well, mate, I've got to say congratulations on your film Disclosure. Even just before I recorded this interview, someone actually messaged me and said, "Hey, have you seen this fantastic new film called Disclosure?" So congratulations.
Fantastic, thank you.
So, Michael, I guess after people have watched the film, a big question's going to be a little bit about you as a filmmaker. I understand that you studied in the UK, but where did your love for film come from, and where did your passion for being a filmmaker all start?
Well, my background was originally in music. That was my first passion, and I guess that was sort of in parallel with filmmaking. But the big falling in love with filmmaking was actually watching a Tarkovsky movie when I was a teenager, and I'd come home. I'm going to give away my age here, but this was an old black and white TV, and back in the UK when I think you had 3 channels at the time, and if you switched on the TV, you could actually catch some really quite interesting movies. You didn't have to look for them. So I switched on the TV, and this movie was already on, and I remember just getting absolutely transfixed by this film. I had no idea what it was. And I never found out. It wasn't until years later I found out what the movie was, and it was when I decided I wanted to become a filmmaker, and I walked into a bookstore and I saw a still from this image, and I remember the still from the film of the teenager, and it turned out to be Tarkovsky's Stalker. And that was a very exciting discovery, so then I watched all of Tarkovsky's movies, and yeah, that was kind of my falling in love with filmmaking. And then I went to I started making films in my late teens, early 20s, and in my mid-20s I managed to get into the UK's National Film and Television School, and I was the last cohort of the film school's founder, Colin Young. So he was a huge influence on the ethos of the school at the time, and that really shaped my early ideas about film, and kind of channeled me into a particular way of thinking about film, and had some extraordinary mentors and teachers at the film school. So that was back in the early 1990s.
Awesome. And you've made a few short films over the years, but tell us a little bit about this big step this time into making a feature film. How did that feel about heading into a feature film, and where did the idea for Disclosure come from?
So it's been a long journey. I won't bore you with my whole life story. It's been a long journey, making shorts, making docos. I've had commissions for TV in the UK. But the feature film the first feature was always elusive. I got very close a few times. I got very close in 2009 to quite a big feature film. It was quite a significant budget, and it was a thriller. And we'd managed to get Damien Lewis in the lead role, but a lot of money was coming from the UK Film Council, and weeks before we turned over, the UK Film Council was axed by the incoming Tory government, so we lost half our production money overnight, and the film went into a tailspin. And then Damien Lewis got Homeland, and he was optioned into Homeland, so we lost Damien, and that was the end of that film. That's probably the closest I came to throwing in the towel, to be honest. But then I came over to Australia 60 years ago, and the idea for this film actually came from an actual story, an actual event, but something that happened to some friends of mine, where their child made a disclosure about having been assaulted by another child, an older child. And at the time, I thought this was just one of those weird, anomalous things that happen. It was really shocking to see how distressed my friends were, and to see how traumatic that kind of experience was for the family. But it wasn't until I started a kind of cursory bit of scrolling through the internet that I found out that this problem is actually a really big problem. It's sitting underneath the radar, but it's a really big problem, and it's a growing problem. And there's a lot of academic papers coming out about it now, a lot of research into the issue, trying to find out why it's a growing problem. And the number one suspect is the availability of online pornography. So basically, primary school, even school age kids are seeing pornography possibly through an older sibling, or because their parents haven't put suitable parental controls on computers, and they're seeing these images and they don't know how to process them. And so some of these kids then start acting out what they're seeing with available other children who are vulnerable. And so the fact that it's a big problem and that it's not on the radar, that started to lead me into the possibility of making something just to kind of raise the profile of this problem. But what really piqued my interest as a storyteller was looking at the research. There was a huge meta-analysis done by the late Professor Frida Briggs, who was working out of I think it was out of Flinders, and it was South Australia. I think it was out of Flinders University. She did a huge meta-analysis into this problem, and one of the patterns that she found was that families that had a child who disclosed being assaulted or abused in some way, the family of the perpetrator would then turn on family of the victim and try and discredit the child's disclosure, and they would get their friends involved. And so it would turn into a kind of contemporary witch hunt. And this is happening again and again, and particularly in remote communities, the outcome of this witch hunt is that the family of the child, the original victim, feel compelled to leave the community. So they're kind of forced out of their home. And I thought that was, as a father, as a parent, I thought that was just appalling. And as a storyteller, I thought the witch hunt dynamic, this really toxic dynamic, was absolutely fascinating, and that's something that I wanted to explore. So that really was the deciding moment for me to try and make a film.
Definitely. And having friends who went through that and it was such a traumatic time for them, did that almost make it harder for you to write the script, or did that kind of fuel a fire where you really wanted this story to be told because you knew what they'd been through?
Oh, absolutely. It fueled it. I really felt for those. I felt for them and the kind of experience they were going through. Similarly to the film, in the film, it's a fiction film, but similarly to the film, they were dealing with all the kinds of and a lot of the kinds of problems that come out in the research, which is they were dealing with the fact that big question marks were made about the validity of their child's disclosure. So this idea that and there's a cultural problem here, and I thought this was really interesting. The cultural problem here, and I guess it stems back to kind of Victorian notions about, children should be seen and not heard kind of idea. And I think that still is very much instilled in the culture here. So you're getting, when a child does tell a story, the general response is that you take it with a pinch of salt. You're not, telling stories is telling lies. There's a cultural problem with believing what little children tell, what little children say, and my friends were experiencing all of this. So, and it was really distressing. So yeah, I felt very strongly for them, and of course that helped, charge the process of turning this into a narrative.
Definitely.
A film narrative.
Yeah. And bringing in the political side as well with Joel, the character of Joel, that's almost ended up being very prophetic to what we're seeing at the moment with the headlines that are going along with what's happening in federal politics at the moment. Where did that idea come about for you to make one of the characters a politician?
Well, at the time, the themes of abuse, of victims being re-victimized, they're really nothing new. I think the Charnham Child backstory is something that sits under the radar, but it totally resonates with what's happening with teenagers at high school. It totally resonates with what's happening with adults outside school. Now, making making one of the characters a politician was simply that was me as a storyteller thinking, okay, how can I raise the stakes? How can I get someone whose vocation, whose job might be put under jeopardy if a disclosure like this gets out about their child, if their child is accused of being a perpetrator. So I just, on a whim, thought, well, actually, a politician, that would be very confronting for a politician to have to face that, and particularly a politician whose remit was working in the Department for youth and children, families and children. So that's how I created the character of Joel, to really ramp up the drama and to ramp up the conflict in the story. Obviously, little knowing that when the film came out 3 years later, it would totally resonate with what's going on in the headlines at the moment. And in fact, reading through the script and reading through the synopsis the last couple of days, it's almost uncanny how it's resonating with what's going on in Parliament at the moment.
Yeah. And the film was shot here in Victoria in the beautiful Dandenong Ranges, I believe. Tell us a little bit about the shoot and what it was like to shoot with such a beautiful backdrop with such a dark story.
Yeah, well, I was interested in that contrast. Again, there's this kind of dramatic conflict in setting a very tense, traumatic story against a really idyllic landscape. Immediately, you've got this kind of resonance there. This conflict. It's a dramatic tension. So when I started to develop the story, I thought I knew the Dandenong Ranges well, and I knew the landscape well. And I thought, what an amazing contrast that will make. And particularly, so the choice of one of the things that features in the film visually is a private pool, and the private pool has it's got a kind of European flavour to it. It looks like it's landed out of Italy or Greece or somewhere. And again, it's got a picture postcard quality to it. And I think I just was really interested in the way that would rub up against this really toxic, confronting story. And there's more to it. I don't know how much this is actually coming through in the film. It's not overtly there, but I was also very interested in the notion of traumascape, which is being developed by a writer, actually a Melbourne-based writer, Maria Timarkin. And she's written a book called Traumascapes, which I've read. And the idea of traumascapes is that many parts of the world have had really appalling things happen in them, genocide or whatever. And this idea that the landscape holds that trauma in some way. And I thought that was really interesting. So, again, looking at the Dandenong Ranges, you've got this beautiful landscape, this temperate rainforest, which for generations was the kind of hunting grounds of the indigenous Wurundjeri. And now it's hotmarked with these very European looking settlements.
Yeah.
And so there is something of a traumascape here when you look at the history of what happened to the Aboriginal communities in this area. So obviously that's very subtextual. It's not explored in the story, but that also interests me. So there is a big montage in the middle of the film where I try to hint at that. The bush holds these secrets.
Yeah. The film had a great run at the Cameo, of course, up in Belgrave, and now it's showing at other cinemas in Melbourne as well, including Cinema Nova. What's the future plans for this film? Because I know a lot of people are going to want to watch this movie right around Australia.
Yeah, so it's got momentum. We're getting some really fantastic reviews. I mean, we actually started the film's life started in the US. We had the world premiere in Palm Springs in January 2020, and we got a huge reception to that premiere and reviews to die for. But then, and off the back of that, we got an American distributor, so it was all looking incredibly exciting in terms of what was going to happen to the film. But then COVID hit, which absolutely torpedoed our plans and the momentum that the film was gaining. And the American distributors were planning to build the film through North American festivals and then launch theatrical release off the back of possibly Hamptons in the US autumn. Of course, that all went that was killed off. So they decided to go straight to video on demand, which was quite distressing to see to experience that last year. But we've got this window of opportunity here in Australia. So there's two things going on. One, we've got a lid on COVID, so it means that the theatres are open, so we can actually have a theatrical release, which is extremely exciting. And that's also combined with the fact that North American studios are holding back the big pictures. So it's really given a bit of an opening for Australian content and possibly more challenging content to find a home. And that seems to be happening. There's been quite a few very successful Australian films.
Yeah,
off the top of my head, like the Drive, for example, is now it's taken over 20 million in the Australian box office, which is fantastic. So so we've been able to kind of plug into that opportunity. But it's tough. It's tough, and being an completely independent film, we haven't got the backing of screen agencies. We haven't got studio marketing budgets or anything like that. It's actually very difficult to get our films seen and heard about. But we've started to get some really fantastic reviews in the Australian press. We were recently reviewed by David Stratton, which has definitely put us onto the national radar, which is great. So we're opening in Adelaide at Wallace cinemas. We're opening in Sydney at Ritz Cinema. So it's starting to open up, and we're getting, and as you said, we're getting emails coming through our website and various other channels from Perth and from Brisbane saying, when's it coming here? So hopefully it will gain enough momentum that we can have a proper national release, which would be amazing.
That is amazing news, absolutely amazing news. And before I go, I want to talk about the cast as well, because this is pretty much a four-hander for most of the film, and it is an absolutely fantastic cast that you put together. How did you go about casting this film, and what was it about those four leads that made you go with them for the casting?
It was, a few things. The planets aligned in a way over when I started to look for cast. So I had a rough idea of kind of people I wanted to play three of the characters, but the kind of blank space for me was the character of Emily, who's the mother of the daughter who makes the little girl who makes the disclosure. And I really didn't have an idea of who I wanted to play that role. And at the time I was mentoring a VCA master's student, Sunday Emerson Gulliver, who made this extraordinary award-winning film called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And the lead role in that was played by Matilda Ridgway. And when I saw that film, I saw Matilda's performance. Thought, wow, she would be she would be an amazing Emily. So then I started to talk to Sunday about how she had managed to find Matilda, and one of the other people that was in that short film was very established screen actor Mark Leonard Winter. And so through Sunday, I got an introduction to Mark and asked whether he would come on board. He read the script. We met for an hour, at the end of which he said, "Yeah, I love this film. I want to do it." And it was through Mark's and Sunday's contacts that we got Geraldine on board and Tom Wren, who plays the politician. Now, what was really important, and I think has really paid off for the film and for how the film was made, because we were very restricted budget-wise, which gave us very little time. We shot the film in 3 weeks. It's a very short period, and we only had 2 days rehearsal time prior to that 3-week shoot. So it was very tough. And one key element was that those four actors knew each other. They'd already worked with each other, and they were friends. So we didn't have to go through this process of the ensemble group going through that process of going, okay, so how does this friendship work? What's our backstory? How are we going to really convey on screen that we have this existing friendship? Because it was already there. So we already had a head start. They brought that to the production. So what the actors could then do was just focus on the story and looking at the disintegration of these friendships through the 90-minute narrative.
Yeah, well, it has turned out to be an absolutely fantastic film, and as I said in my review, this is 4 of the best performances that you're going to see this year. So, congratulations again, Michael. And I guess
Thank you so much.
I guess to finish up, what would you like to say to our listeners out there before they head along to the cinema to check out Disclosure?
Oh, I don't know what I'd say before. I would certainly say after you've seen it, if you like it. I mean, what I really hope this is what the film seems to be doing. It does seem to be moving people. It does seem to be really getting under people's skin. Certainly, what was happening in Belgrade was fascinating. Looking at the social media and seeing all the feedbacks. Quite a few people were going to the film not twice but 3 times. They were kept going back to it, which was really fascinating to look at. And I guess the big message I want to send out there, because we're an independent film, because we don't have the big marketing advertising budget, we're so heavily reliant on word of mouth, and we really saw word of mouth happen in Belgrade Cameo, where we were given a single screening, then we were given 1 week, and we ended up playing for 4 weeks. So if you like the film, please go out into the community, tell your friends, tell your family about the movie, and tell them to go and see it. And that's how these kind of films, that's how these films work, and that's how these films get seen.
Definitely. Well, Michael, thank you so much for chatting to us today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and we cannot wait to see what your next film project is going to be as well.
Thanks so much, David. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. I'll let you go. Have a great day, and hopefully we get to catch up at some stage as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome, mate. I'll let you go.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.